Father, we're so thankful that we live in a democracy and we live in a country where we actually have the freedom to choose our own leaders. Democracy did not exist before America invented it, and it's an incredible invention where there is a peaceful transition of power, where someone who holds the position of arguably the most powerful political seat on earth willingly gives it up based on the Constitution. That in itself is a miracle. So we're thankful that we get a chance to participate in this process of democracy. But we're also thankful that regardless of who ends up in the Oval Office, our lives are not changed by that. Because Jesus Christ is the author and finisher of our faith. And while seasons of political differences may create different tensions, ultimately, if our eyes are stayed on you and fixed on Jesus Christ as the Lord, it tells us clearly that you hold the hearts of kings and men in the palm of your hands, and you turn them whichever way you desire. So, Lord, let your will be done in America so that the world will know that our God reigns. I pray that there be no violence, that all the exit polling and all the ballot counting and all goes smoothly and honestly with integrity, so that whoever is the one that you have chosen to sit on the seat of power is the one that will be there. Thank you, Father, for what you'll do in Jesus' precious name. And even now, as we prepare to open up the scriptures and continue our study in the book of Acts, I pray that you anoint my tongue so that I speak as the oracles of God. And let the words that I speak be spirit and life, and let them be imprinted upon our hearts deeper than anything else, so that we are not just hearers of the word, but doers. May you be glorified in Jesus' precious name. Amen. So, we're at the point in the story where Paul has spent 2 years in prison. And Felix, who was the governor, has moved on, and a new governor has come in, Festus. And so we pick up the story because Festus has come in, but King Agrippa, who is sort of the Roman lackey king, because what the Romans did was they installed kings over the people to help with the interpretation of culture and law and religion and all that. But ultimately, the more powerful person was the governor, the Roman governor who was there. So this is Festus. So we pick up the story in chapter 25, and I've titled it, I Appeal to Caesar. You'll understand why as we go on. 3 days after Festus arrived in Caesarea to take over his new responsibilities, he left for Jerusalem, where the leading priests and other Jewish leaders met with him and made their accusations against Paul. They asked Festus as a favor to transfer Paul to Jerusalem, planning to ambush and kill him on the way. 2 years have gone past. Man, I wonder if those guys are dead yet. The ones who took a vow, an oath that we're not going to eat or drink. But you know, those clowns, those 40, you know they ate and drank for sure. So, Festus is governor. The Jewish leaders haven't moved on. They're still intent on killing Paul. And so Festus, 3 days after becoming governor, heads to Jerusalem for the express purpose, I know this for a fact, not from the scriptures, but from extra biblical resources, that the only reason he went to Jerusalem was to ascertain that all was well and that taxes were being paid. There were no insurrections rising up against Rome, no trouble, because that's what the governors were supposed to be there for, along with their Roman guards, to make sure that there were no insurrections and that taxes were being paid. That's as long as that happened, Rome didn't care. So he gets there and he's bombarded with accusations against Paul because they're still plotting Paul's demise, all in the name of religion. This is what religion does. It kills. But Festus replied that Paul was at Caesarea, and he himself would be returning there soon. So he said, "Those of you in authority can return with me. If Paul has done anything wrong, you can make your accusations." I love that. I love the fact that he's new, only 3 days, and you would think that, because if you remember, last week we read that Felix liked to curry favor with, he wanted to please, that's why the Jews, that's why he left Paul in prison. But this guy is already establishing, you know what, I'm not here to do your bidding, you're here to do mine. So Paul is at Caesarea, I'm returning in just a few days, so those of you who are in authority, who have these allegations against Paul, you can come down with me. If Paul has done anything wrong, you can make your accusations. About 8 or 10 days later, Festus returned to Caesarea. And on the following day, he took his seat in court and ordered that Paul be brought in. When Paul arrived, the Jewish leaders from Jerusalem gathered around and made many serious accusations they couldn't prove. Many serious accusations they couldn't prove. Can you believe that? You're making these serious accusations, but you can't prove them. You have no evidence. Paul denied the charges. "I'm not guilty of any crime against the Jewish laws or the temple or the Roman government," he said. Then Festus, wanting to please the Jews, here we go again, asked him, "Are you willing to go to Jerusalem and stand trial before me there?" So, it seems increasingly clear to me that every Roman procurator, which is what the governors were called, they were procurators, every Roman procurator in Judea and Israel has just one goal: to keep the peace and levy taxes. That's all they want to do. And Festus, it appears, is no different. And so rather than use the authority that's been delegated to him by Rome, he offers that Paul should go and stand trial before him in Jerusalem. So the very thing that he had told them he wasn't willing to do, now suddenly he's willing to do it, having heard the allegations, and there's still no evidence. But yet he's willing just to please the Jews and make them happy. Even though the seat of government is in Caesarea. That's the seat of the Roman government. Obviously, the seat of the Jewish government is in Jerusalem. Both the king Agrippa lived there, and so did all the leading priests and high priests. But they're being tried, they're bringing it to Rome, as it were, to resolve this issue. But Paul replied, "No, I love it. This is the official Roman court. So I ought to be tried right here. You know very well I'm not guilty of harming the Jews." So this is Paul's response to Festus, the governor. "No. Are you willing to stand trial in Jerusalem before me? No. This is the official Roman court. So try me here, because you know that I'm not guilty." And my response here is that Paul is very wise in declining this. And he points out to Festus that they're already standing in the Roman seat of government. So why don't you do the trial right here? Right? This is the Roman seat of government. You are the Roman Caesar's representative here. You are the Roman governor. Why are we going to Jerusalem? What's the purpose? There's no reason not to try my case right here. Especially since, as he points out to Festus, that Festus knows he isn't guilty of these crimes that he's being accused of anyway. So why all the show, the pomp and pageantry of traveling to Jerusalem where you just spent 10 days and going back just so you can sit on a different chair in a different city and hear the same false allegations with no evidence? What's the point? So Paul goes on to say, if I've done something worthy of death, I don't refuse to die. I love that he's so willing to die for his faith. And if I've done something that's worthy of death, I don't refuse to die. But if I'm innocent, no one has a right to turn me over to these men to kill me. I appeal to Caesar. Those are the magic words. Because once someone has done that, nobody else. If you're a Roman citizen and you appeal to Caesar, nobody else gets to sit in judgment over you. You have to be sent to Rome. You have to be transported to Rome to be tried before Caesar, or someone that Caesar designates to try you in Rome. So this is like a trump card, because when Paul realized that these guys are playing games with me, tossing me back and forth. I've been here for 2 years with Felix, preaching to him and his wife, who was Jewish. But when Felix left, he left me in prison. I mean, this has gone on long enough. You want to toss me back and forth between Jerusalem and Caesarea, knowing that these guys just want to kill me. And so he appeals to Caesar. Festus conferred with his advisors and then replied, "Very well, you have appealed to Caesar, and to Caesar you will go." Because, as I said, an appeal to Caesar was like asking for a review of your court case by the Supreme Court. You know, once you've gone through the legal system all the way up to the appellate court, and your case is still not decided in your favor, you can appeal to the Supreme Court. And once you've appealed to the Supreme Court, they make the decision. Every lower court's decision no longer has authority and power over you. So he appealed to Caesar, who was the final authority and trump card. So now he must stand trial in Rome. A few days later, King Agrippa arrived with his sister, Bernice. So Agrippa, when he heard that Paul had appealed to Caesar, now comes down from Jerusalem, and he comes to pay his respects to Festus. During their stay of several days, Festus discussed Paul's case with the king. "There's a prisoner here," he told him, "whose case was left for me by Felix. When I was in Jerusalem, the leading priests and Jewish elders pressed charges against him and asked me to condemn him. I pointed out to them that Roman law does not convict people without a trial. They must be given an opportunity to confront their accusers and defend themselves." So, where are we so far? King Agrippa comes to visit Festus and congratulate him on his appointment as the new Roman procurator. And part of their conversation centers around Paul and the Jewish leaders' desire to have him killed. As I read this, I thought, what a sad indictment on religion and on any kind of faith these people espoused. Here are these Romans, secular Romans who had no regard for God, no belief in any God. They had multiple gods. The same gods that the Greeks served were the same gods that the Romans served, except by different names. So Zeus in Greek mythology is actually Jupiter in Roman mythology. So these are this. So they say they worshipped. So they had these multiplicity of gods that they worshipped, and yet he is the one who's willing to stand by the law. I mean, these chief priests and all are so blinded by their belief system. And I've often said the most dangerous kind of human being is a person who has an ideology, but that ideology is rooted in a belief that they're doing something for God. That's the most dangerous kind of human being. You see, because if you think about it, wars, some of the greatest wars in the world have been started by ideologies. The Spanish Inquisition. People, they believed they were on a mission for God. So they had these ideologies, and I fear that our country is moving that, because I've never seen, in all the years I've been here, and I've been here now, Demi he's 34, and he turned a year in America. So 34 years. I've never seen it so divided. So it is crazy to believe that we actually want the same things for the same country. Because, yeah, people have differences of opinions how to accomplish the same objective. But we have made it a country that is so divided. It reminds me of the Tower of Babel. And we don't do it politely or carefully. We're insulting. And I mean, I have these things that I printed out. But for now, I just want to highlight this one. This is a New Era Baptist Church. This is a sign that they put out in front of their church. Attention to all blacks who plan to vote for Trump. You are an ignorant, stupid Negro. This is a church. Yeah, I mean, look at it. It's a church. You are an ignorant, stupid Negro. A church.
A church named New Era.
So this is, my point is, this is ideology mixed with the false belief that you're on a mission for God, most dangerous kind of humans, most deadly. And that's what these people are. They're on this mission to kill Paul because they believe that everything Jesus stood for and all his followers was evil, because it will destroy the religion that they sit at the helm of and the things that they want to establish. It's not about God. It was never about God. It was always about power, political power. And that's what you see happening nonstop. It's Christian nationalism. That really is what it is. You make it about, we want our country to be worshipped and we want our country to serve God, so we try to impose legislation. Not everybody's a believer. Not everybody's a Christ follower. Who are we to decide that you have to live according to the dictates of the scripture? Nowhere in the Bible does it tell us that that's what we have to impose our way of life on people. What it calls us to do is to love them. 2 laws. That's all Jesus gave us. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. And love your neighbor as yourself. Those are the laws. If we do those 2 things, it's pretty difficult to vilify and insult other people and call them names and make them out to be the enemy of God, calling them Satan and Antichrist and all of that. So it's so interesting to me that it is Festus who points out that Roman law forbids condemning people to death without a trial. Yet, the high priest and all of these people are willing to lie and do anything they can to get Paul to die. The people who led the entire Jewish culture spiritually. When his accusers came here for the trial, I didn't delay. This is Festus speaking. I called the case the very next day and ordered Paul brought in. But the accusations made against him weren't any of the crimes I expected. Instead, it was something about their religion and a dead man named Jesus. This is what Festus believes, and a dead man named Jesus, who Paul insists is alive. I was at a loss to know how to investigate these things. Of course you would be. I mean, in your experience, where have you ever heard that a dead man was alive? Of course, so he's probably thinking Paul is a little Looney Tunes here. So I asked him whether he would be willing to stand trial on these charges in Jerusalem. But Paul appealed to have his case decided by the emperor. So I ordered that he be held in custody until I could arrange to send him to Caesar. So bit by bit, I'm beginning to get it through my thick skull that faith and religion are polar opposites. It's taken me a while, but I'm finally beginning to get it. Faith and religion are polar opposites. They don't want the same thing. One defends the status quo to protect its own interests, and the other is willing to look foolish and give up its own way for the truth and the best interest of others. I don't have to tell you which is which, but think about it. He says, as he's telling Agrippa about Paul, he says, it was something about their religion and a dead man named Jesus, who Paul insists is alive. So all the high priests, everyone believes that, even though they know, because the body of Jesus was no longer in the tomb, they know, but they're trying to make Paul out to be this crazy guy who claims that someone is alive who's actually dead. Paul was willing to look stupid. He was willing for them to believe that about him. But he was not going to back down from what he believed, from what he knew to be truth. Yet they were willing to lie, steal, cheat, and even kill. So, pay close attention to Festus's description of the trial, because what Festus says will tell us what he heard and what had the greatest impact on him. So Festus observed that, 1, the accusations weren't of any crimes, but of religious differences. So that's the first observation. There was no real crime. He said it. He said, these weren't any of the crimes I expected, the accusations. It was something about their religion. So they were not of any crimes, but of religious differences. That's one. The second thing he observed was, it was about a dead man named Jesus. It was about a dead man named Jesus. The third thing that he observed was a dead man who Paul insists is alive. Keep in mind, he's telling King Agrippa, who is the Jewish ruler at this time, the things that he heard in this trial. So naturally, you're going to talk about the things that you heard that made the greatest impact on you. Because I'm sure there weren't just these 4 sentences spoken and that was the end of the trial. But these are the things that stood out to him, that the accusations weren't of any crimes. They were just religious differences. They were about this dead man named Jesus, who apparently was the instigator of this religion. And this dead man, according to Paul, is still alive. And then the fourth thing that I love that he said was this, that he didn't know what to do to adjudicate a matter such as this. He didn't know what to do. He said it himself. He says, I was at a loss to know how to investigate these things. What do you do as a Roman procurator who doesn't believe in any faith to speak of? And you hear this report that this Jesus who was killed, crucified, everybody knows, it's public knowledge, is actually not dead. Paul insists he's alive. How do you adjudicate this? How do you rule? So he was clear that I have no idea how to manage this. Then he tells us that he offers Paul the option of going back to Jerusalem to stand trial in front of the Jewish leaders, which really is purely an attempt to remove the responsibility off him, because he doesn't know what to do, and let them make the decision. Same thing that they did with Jesus, remember? Pilate washed his hands. What do you want me to do with him? He's not guilty of anything. I don't see any crimes. So what do you want me to do with him? Crucify him, crucify him. Okay, his blood on your heads. He didn't want to make the decision. It seems that these Romans, like I said, all they wanted was peace and taxes. They wanted to, because this was not a big, wealthy part of the Roman Empire. This was a far-flung outpost, this Judea place. The big empires were closer to Europe and all of that. That's where there was a lot of money. So people who were sent there basically weren't the best of top of the leaders, the Roman leaders. So they wanted to serve there peacefully, make a lot of money for Rome so that maybe they could get a better posting somewhere else. So the story goes on. I'd like to hear the man myself, Agrippa said. And Festus replied, you will tomorrow. So the next day, Agrippa and Bernice arrived at the auditorium with great pomp, accompanied by military officers and prominent men of the city. Festus ordered that Paul be brought in. Then Festus said, King Agrippa and all who are here, this is the man whose death is demanded by all the Jews, both here and in Jerusalem. But listen to Festus's testimony. In my opinion, he has done nothing to deserve death, nothing deserving death. However, since he appealed his case to the emperor, I've decided to send him to Rome. So Festus lays on this ceremonial welcome for Agrippa, all this pomp and pageantry, all these military officers, prominent men, to meet and question Paul, while pointing out that he personally doesn't see anything that Paul has done wrong as being worthy of death. So here's what he says is the real reason he's gathering these people in front of Agrippa. But what shall I write the emperor? For there is no clear charge against him. So I have brought him before all of you, and especially you, King Agrippa. See how he's shirking responsibility? So that after we examine him, I might have something to write. For it makes no sense to send a prisoner to the emperor without specifying the charges against him. True. And since there are no legitimate charges, I need you guys. Let's interview him now. You guys come up with the charges that we'll be able to write and send to the emperor. So I asked the question, and I left this for you because instead of me just having to tell you and you write it down, you have it on your paperwork. Who is this King Agrippa, whose opinion carries such weight, even with a Roman procurator like Festus, who outranks him by authority of Rome? How come King Agrippa is so important to Festus that Festus needs his input? Well, here's why. King Agrippa, who we read about in Acts 25, where we are now, is the great-grandson of Herod the Great. He is the great-grandson of Herod the Great. Who remembers who Herod the Great is? Anyone? He was the king at the time when Jesus was born. Herod the Great. So this is Herod's great-grandson. And imagine, this is almost like what happened with Jesus playing out all over again. He was a vassal king. Agrippa was a vassal king of the Romans. And so he basically helped to keep subject states quiet for the Romans, all the areas that he oversaw. No insurrections, no uprisings. And Paul had first been brought before this governor, Festus. So in Judea, Agrippa zealously pursued Orthodox Jewish policies, earning the friendship of the Jews and vigorously repressing Jewish Christians. That's key. He vigorously repressed Jewish Christians. And according to the New Testament, in Acts chapter 12, he's referred to as Herod Agrippa, because again, he's the grandson of Herod the Great. So he's referred to as Herod Agrippa. He imprisoned Peter, the apostle, and beheaded James, the son of Zebedee. We know all of this. So this Agrippa guy is a staunch opposer of who Jesus is and all his disciples. So I put it's not a hyperlink, but I put a link there so that you can copy and paste it into your browser to learn more about the life and death of King Agrippa. So we move on to chapter 26, which I've titled, King Agrippa Speaks. Then Agrippa said to Paul, "You may speak in your defense." So Paul, gesturing with his hand, started his defense. "I'm fortunate, King Agrippa, that you are the one hearing my defense today against all these accusations made by the Jewish leaders. Because I know you are an expert on all Jewish customs and controversies." Of course you are. You're a Jew. Okay, so now, please listen to me patiently. Remember the other guys, when they came to Festus, we won't take up too much of your time. We know you're busy. I mean, they were very deferent and all that. We just need to speak with, not Paul. Paul is saying, hey, I know you're an expert on this, so let's talk about this. So listen to me patiently. Don't rush me. I need you to be patient. As the Jewish leaders are well aware, I was given a thorough Jewish training from my earliest childhood among my own people and in Jerusalem. If they would admit it, these people who are lying through their teeth, they know that I have been a member of the Pharisees, the strictest sect of our religion. Now I'm on trial because of my hope in the fulfillment of God's promise made to our ancestors. In fact, that is why the 12 tribes of Israel zealously worship God night and day, and they share the same hope I have. Yet, Your Majesty, they accuse me for having this hope. Why does it seem incredible to any of you that God can raise the dead? I love this because this is him demonstrating his knowledge of the Torah, the Old Testament scriptures, and making it clear that all these allegations that are brought against him because he has a faith and a hope in the promise that our ancestors made to us, the same thing that these Pharisees, these chief priests and all, the same hope they have. It's the same thing they believe. Yet, they accuse me for having this hope. I mean, he just destroyed them. But, still seems incredible to us today. If you think about it, as Christ followers, we can't even trust that God can control the affairs of our nation, no matter who sits in the Oval Office. That's why we're in such fear. I was talking to someone, I won't mention his name, because you guys know this person, and I don't want to. So I remember saying that I had a real existential fear of what would happen to black people if Trump becomes president again, because of what happened in 2016, the many deaths that led up to 2020 when the Black Lives Matter thing happened with all the police killings. And I said, I had a real existential fear because I had tremendous concerns for myself. I've talked with you about this before. This person said to me, I have a real existential fear of Kamala Harris getting into office. And I looked at him, I said, so you're telling me that your fear of the financial downturn of the economy, assuming that was to happen, is an existential fear, versus my fear of brutality, death. And I just chuckled, and I thought, ultimately, it doesn't matter to me who gets into the White House. I'm a praying person. I have to trust that God is sovereign and that God is the provider and protector of all, not who sits in the White House. Who sat in the White House did not protect the people who died, the 3,000 people who died on 9/11. Doesn't matter who sits in the White House. If Satan throws a weapon at us, if Russia or China decide to launch a nuclear attack, it doesn't matter who sits in the White House. They cannot protect us. It has to be God. And that is what I'm coming to terms with, because some of the rhetoric in this last week. So I don't know if you knew that there were these two things that happened last week. One was Trump's rally in, I believe it was in New York. He had a comedian. They had a number of different speakers, and this comedian basically called Puerto Rico a floating island of trash. And then Biden, in response, called, the way he said it, it appeared that he was referring to all Trump supporters, that they are the floating islands of trash. They tried to put a spin on it to say he was referring to the comedian specifically. I don't care. I think they were all doing it. But this, I think the thing that broke my heart was this. This was from the page of a Christian friend of mine. I screenshotted it. A Christian friend of mine. So basically what it is, as you can see, this is a dress made out of trash bags and a trash can. And what it says at the bottom is, if you know, you know, just putting it out there. That because we're Trump supporters is basically what this Christian friend of mine was saying. Yeah, so if Biden's calling us trash, that's fine. We look good in our trash. I mean, I just think it just baffles me how it feels to me. Maybe because I wasn't born here and so I'm observing it from a different perspective. How is it possible that people who live in the same country, who are the most blessed country on earth, really, who are supposedly the same people, have such poison towards each other? Greg Locke, a pastor in Tennessee, here's what he said. In his sermon, he said that this month, the US will be hit with a catastrophic storm that is going to be man-made. If Kamala wins this election, hear me when I tell you, we will never have another one. This is a pastor. So his belief is so potently against anyone but Trump getting into office that if she wins, we will never have another election. This is a pastor. So his hope is in the political system so much that he's saying, if this person wins, we will turn this nation upside. We'll never have another election. The problem with such foolish emotional tantrums is you lose any credibility. How are you going to stop there being another election? They also, I wrote down, this is another thing. This pastor actually, they said he floated a conspiracy theory that recent U.S. Capitol Police training exercises are connected to a plan by congressional Democrats to keep Trump out of power, even if he wins. How does the Capitol Police have any authority of who gets into the... And people believe these kind of things. The Capitol Police, the guys who ran away when the January 6th uprising happened, they're the ones who will try to keep a president who has been duly elected out of power. I mean, some of these things are so far-fetched, it's hard to believe. But it's all, what I've learned is that mob mentality doesn't see reason. It's not about reason. It's about, I have my gripe, you have your gripe, you have, and as we come together and begin to fuel each other's gripes, it just gets worse and worse and out of control, and it just explodes. That's what happens. So, Paul continues his speech, and he says, I used to believe that I ought to do everything I could to oppose the very name of Jesus the Nazarene. Indeed, I did just that in Jerusalem, authorized by the leading priests. These same priests are the ones who gave me the authority. I caused many believers there to be sent to prison, and I cast my vote against them when they were condemned to death. So Paul is basically saying, I joined other Pharisees in voting these people to death. Many times I had them punished in the synagogues to get them to curse Jesus. I was so violently opposed to them that I even chased them down in foreign cities. One day I was on such a mission to Damascus, armed with the authority and commissioning of the leading priests. So these people who are bringing these accusations against me used me for their benefit. They gave me the authority to catch all these people and imprison them and punish them and kill them. About noon, Your Majesty, as I was on the road, a light from heaven, brighter than the sun, shone down on me and my companions. We all fell down, and I heard a voice saying to me in Aramaic, Saul, Saul, why are you persecuting me? It is useless for you to fight against my will. Who are you, Lord? I asked. And the Lord replied, I am Jesus, the one you are persecuting. Now get to your feet, for I have appointed to you, I have appeared to you to appoint you as my servant and witness. Tell people that you have seen me, and tell them what I will show you in the future. And I will rescue you from both your own people and the Gentiles. Yes, I'm sending you to the Gentiles, to open their eyes so they may turn from darkness to light and from the power of Satan to God. Then they will receive forgiveness for their sins and be given a place among God's people who are set apart by faith in me. And so, King Agrippa, I obeyed that vision from heaven. Let's pause there for a moment, because this is the first time. When the Damascus Road experience happened, we weren't given all this detail. We were just given the detail about, okay, go to this city, look for a man named this, and he'll pray for you. The reason this is so powerful and so important to me is, I've often wondered, because as you read through the scriptures, you hear all the things that Paul endured. The number of times he was lashed, the number of times he was imprisoned, the number of shipwrecks he went through, all of that. And I think, how does one man sustain all that? Here's why. This is why. God spoke to him so clearly about his mission. And what I'm realizing is, the way the enemy fights people like us is by making us second guess, did God really say? Is this really God? He makes it either difficult or hard, or causes people to speak against you and question you. That is because that seed of doubt is sufficient to derail you. Because when it gets hard, you cannot endure it in your own strength unless you have this blueprint, this clear knowledge as to what God has spoken to you. Otherwise, you'll quit. And so I'm realizing that Paul had this. I mean, look at all of this. God told him that he would preach to the Gentiles, he would preach to the Jews. And notice he said, I heard a voice saying to me in Aramaic. And he said, those who were with him didn't understand, but they saw the light. So it was only Paul who was able to hear clearly what the mandate was. No wonder people were persuading him, don't go back to Jerusalem. But he knew what God had spoken. He said, I will deliver you from your own people and from the Gentiles. I'll make sure that everything, look, he says it here, I will rescue you from both your own people and the Gentiles. Yes, I'm sending you to the Gentiles. You remember, Paul didn't want to go to the Gentiles. In fact, he went to the Jews first until it just wasn't working out and he realized he had to be obedient. This is where I think every single one of us as true Christ followers, and it's so apropos that today is election day, because regardless of who we voted for, regardless of how the election results turn out, you have to decide whether Jesus is still Lord, whether he's still on the throne, and whether the mandate that he's given each one of us is true. Because if we allow the enemy to steal that truth and to convince us that maybe you missed God, maybe you didn't really hear him, maybe that's not really what he called you to, then you won't stand up for what you believe in. You just won't. You can't, because there's too much pressure, too much backlash, too much vitriol. I don't think the internet, social media, is the experiment that they thought it would be. It has turned into something that completely, it's the Tower of Babel all over again. It really is the Tower of Babel. Because what it has done is it has programmed us to believe that people who we don't even personally know, that we've never been acquainted with, influence our lives. And what they think about who we are and what we're doing matters so much. That's why likes matter. That's why we want to go viral. That's why we present this image on social media about a life that we're living that isn't always true. Because we only show the good side, the side that we want people to like. So I'm saying that it has programmed us into something that we were never meant to be. So I tell you this honestly, today when Shola and I went walking, because I've really been praying and seeking God on this, as I've been reading a number of books about different things, and I'm reading one right now that talks about the gift of generosity. And I told Shola that I think I'm going to get off social media. I'm going to get off Facebook. I'm going to actually cancel my account. Because I don't think it's shaping me into the man that God wants me to be. I think its impact on my life is, because I'm constantly dealing with trying to keep my heart clean when I see, especially around political season, when I see certain posts and the way people, how you hinge my faith on a political decision is a mystery to me. But I see it constantly. Over the course, since 2016, I've lost hundreds of friends. Some of them were actually good friends, people I knew personally, on social media because of political differences. I mean, someone said to me, and you call yourself a pastor? Yeah, I mean, I've had all kinds of things. And I realize I struggle to keep my heart clean towards people like that. And that's only because I'm on social media. Because think about it, before social media, if I had a vitriolic perspective on politics, only the people I knew and talked to that were close friends would ever hear it. But now I can put it online, and everyone in every country of the world who chooses to look at my Facebook page can see it, and then others can share it, and before you know it, it goes viral. I somehow think, and I see how that could work for the benefit of the gospel, but I also realize that Satan uses that tool so effectively. So The story continues. I preached first to those in Damascus, then in Jerusalem and throughout all Judea, and also to the Gentiles, that all must repent of their sins and turn to God, and prove they have changed by the good things they do. So it's not enough to just say it and just turn to God. There's another step. Prove they have changed by the good things they do. When you look at how Christians attack each other from both sides of the aisle, is there anything good that we see from that? When we look and listen, in fact, the world looks at us and despises anything that we stand for. They think of us as hypocrites. Yet, that is a ploy of the enemy, because we have to prove that we have changed by the good things we do. He goes on to say, some Jews arrested me in the temple for preaching this, and they tried to kill me. But God has protected me right up to this present time, so I can testify to everyone from the least to the greatest. I teach nothing except what the prophets and Moses said would happen, that the Messiah would suffer and be the first to rise from the dead, and in this way announce God's light to Jews and Gentiles alike. Suddenly Festus shouted, Paul, you are insane. He couldn't contain it anymore. Too much study has made you crazy. But Paul replied, I'm not insane, most excellent Festus. What I'm saying is the sober truth, and King Agrippa knows about these things. I speak boldly, for I'm sure that these events are all familiar to him, for they were not done in a corner. These events about Jesus' death, they were not done in a corner. Everybody knows. So remember, Festus had just come from Rome, so he wasn't there when Jesus was crucified and rose from the dead and all. Agrippa was. So he's challenging Agrippa, basically, in front of Festus. King Agrippa knows about these things. So you may not have been here. So you may think I'm crazy for saying all these things. He was. He knows that these things are true. These events are familiar to him because they were not done in a corner. King Agrippa, do you believe the prophets? I know you do. Agrippa interrupted him. Do you think you can persuade me to become a Christian so quickly? Paul replied, whether quickly or not, I pray to God that both you and everyone here in this audience might become the same as I am, except for these chains. In other words, that you'll find the same faith that I've found. Then the king, the governor, Bernice, and all the others stood and left. So Paul, having concluded his spirited defense, rests his case at the will of Agrippa and Festus. It's up to you guys now. As they went out, this is the king, Agrippa, the governor, Festus, and Bernice, Agrippa's wife. As they went out, they talked it over and agreed. This man hasn't done anything to deserve death or imprisonment. And Agrippa said to Festus, he could have been set free if he hadn't appealed to Caesar. So Agrippa, remember what we read about who he was? The grandson of Herod the Great, who killed all the babies under 2 years old. Agrippa, who was known for his zealous persecution of Jewish Christians, imprisoning Peter, beheading James, stands on the side of Paul, a professing and devout follower of the way, against the Jewish spiritual leaders. So the amazing thing to me is, if Paul hadn't actually appealed to Caesar, they would have released him. What I'm curious to know is, what then were the allegations that they wrote as they sent him on to Rome? Because as we'll see in the next chapter, he was sent to Rome to stand before Caesar. So, all right, let's talk about this.